Someone who has a very heightened emotional response, someone who feels really stressed or has a short fuse, or it doesn't take them much to kind of like wig out, if you will. Typically, they have a nervous system that is very slow responding. It doesn't catch up when it needs to catch up. The whole intention behind that nervous system is to keep things stable, to keep things kind of at bay, make sure that we survive, we can think straight, we can get out of, harm's way when we need to, but then we can also downregulate when we need to. If we do learn how to better manage those areas, or we train that response, then we can tune that nervous system or tune that vagus nerve to listen more and actually become more responsive.
This is the Longevity Loop podcast, and I'm your host, Brent Wallace. In every episode, I bring you the leading voices in longevity, plus my own insights to put the world's best strategies directly into your hands, making elite longevity strategies accessible to everyone, regardless of your background. So let's jump into the loop starting right now. All right, everyone, welcome to the Longevity Loop podcast. So today we got a crazy special guest. His name is Dr. Jay Wiles. We are going to talk about all kinds of cool things: HRV, resonance breathing, vagal nerve, all those things related, and all the science behind that. So, kind of maybe like most of you, if you read anything health related, longevity related, whatever, you kind of see that HRV is kind of becoming the new health flex, right? It's like, oh, how high can I get my score? And everyone wants this higher score, and even with my Whoop, I'm part of a bunch of friends, and at the end of the week, it's like, who has who's the winner this week? It's like, your recovery is the best, something like that. So, but what's funny is that, and including me to a certain extent, but nobody really knows exactly what the score is. They might know what HRV is, heart rate variability, but what does it mean? Where does it come from? All those types of history and what it's actually measuring. So today I want to ask the bigger question, kind of the overarching question: can you actually train your nervous system instead of just tracking it? Which is really cool today with the product we're going to be talking about, which is the Ohm Health, the breathing device. And it's just cool that most things just track, and this device is meant to train, which is a huge differentiator with a lot of these systems. It's like a lot of them just track. Not many actually train your nervous system. And this will train resonance breathing. And this is and that's what this is in. And Jay will get into this. I'm butchering it now because I'm getting into the weeds already. But just a quick disclaimer before we jump into this conversation: it's for educational purpose only. We're not. I'm not a doctor. Jay's a doctor, but it's not personal medical advice. You always, especially with really high level stuff in the longevity and kind of the upper echelons of health stuff, this isn't basic stuff. This is really something you want to talk with your physician about to make sure that you're doing the right thing for your specific body and condition, because a lot of this stuff is very much personalized medicine kind of based stuff. And while the device today isn't necessarily for that, you just always want to talk to your doctor. So just with that out of the way, we're joined today by Dr. Jay Wiles. And Jay is a performance psychologist and psychophysiology expert focused on the nervous system. I butchered that word too. I should have drank more coffee today, or more ketones.
It's a big word.
It is. It's like sometimes I'm like, hold on, like I got these things. It reminds me when I was like 4 or 5. I could never say ambulance for whatever reason, and just and then at some point it just clicks. So anyway, Jay is he's a badass, and he's the Chief Health and Performance Officer over at Ohm Health, which is what we're going to talk about mainly today. Is that device that's coming out this summer of 2026 as we record this. So we're going to dive into the science behind HRV, vagal tone, resonance breathing, what's real, what's hype. Like I said, it's just a big flex now, and like there's so much junk out there nowadays, and so it's really important to really cut through what can really, really help you and move the needle in your personal life, and just kind of what is bogus stuff. So just one last thing. and just this is like the honest reflection for my one of the reasons I bought this device or pre-ordered it. It's one of the few devices that I actually want sitting in my home and to be like kind of a focus piece or like a ritual object, and it just doesn't feel like a gadget. It really feels like a beautiful device that you actually want to be seen instead of hidden away in your, workout room or, your closet or wherever it is. But, so the bigger question for me though, is whether there's really any physiology under the hood. So I haven't used enough to make any actual claims. Today we'll do a live demo and, kind of check out how it does work. So I've just been hearing a lot about the whole excitement around this resonance breathing. And it's just kind of, and you might've been heard it on podcasts here and there, but this whole new, I guess it's not new science, but it's seems to be a little bit more in the consciousness now is this resonance breathing. And then, what it does for stress resilience, broader downstream effects, and really just separating what's the reality of everything. So with that said, let's start with the HRV conversation. Like I said, it's just been like, it's a buzzword. It's really buzzy. So Jay, can you explain in plain English, what is HRV actually telling us?
Yeah, thanks for the intro. I love that we're about to dig into some really important topics, and I always just say, obviously, I'm very tied to a product, which is Ohm, and work for that company, and have been a part of developing this. But I think more than anything, as a researcher, as an academic, and also as a clinician, one of my big priorities is how can I provide information and education out there that's tangible and usable and easy to understand, because I think that the world of heart rate variability and the field of psychophysiology is a very complex field. There's a lot of granularity, there's a lot of nuance. It's not an easy field to understand, which is why HRV probably has become a flex, and it shouldn't be. And we can get into all the reasons as to why, like, HRV shouldn't be like a metric that is like a trophy, if you will. But I just wanted to kind of like start off by saying I'm excited to be here and to be able to talk to you about this. I always like to start really high level and then get more granular. And so feel free, Brent, kind of as we go, if there's something that you want me to double click on to kind of share a little bit more in depth, more than happy to do it. But put very simply, heart rate variability, and I'm going to explain it not as a metric, but explain actually what it's looking at. It is looking at the adaptability of the nervous system. So it is the single greatest non-invasive proxy that we have for measuring the dynamic changes and adjustments or adaptations that the nervous system is making. So we know that if we have a nervous system that is not very finely tuned, so think of this almost kind of like a car, if you will. So if you have one that's not very finely tuned, then there's a lot of creaks, a lot of scratching, not a lot of good adjustments. You kind of press the gas pedal and there's lag. You press the brake and there's lag. It just doesn't function very efficiently. But we can train our nervous system and use HRV as a guide to become much more like a Formula One car. So Formula One cars are some of the most pristine, highly engineered, expensive cars and engines out there. And we can train our nervous system to become much more like that. So HRV kind of tells us, where are we? Like, is our nervous system operating kind of like a 1970s, like really poor car? Or is it like operating like an F1 car? And you can use that metric over time to kind of see whether or not your nervous system is making true adaptations or not. Another way to even think about this is in terms of its ability to tell you how your nervous system is adapting to stress load, whether that's physiological stress, so physiological exertion, but also mental health and stress resiliency from more of a psychological perspective. So put very simply, HRV just looks at the adaptations of your nervous system and kind of gives you a thumbs up, we're doing really good here, or a thumbs down, like things aren't operating very efficiently like we want it to. From a scientific perspective, a lot of people will then say, well, how does HRV, or the variance in heart rate, in your heart rate, how does that kind of determine or tell more about adaptations of the nervous system? And what I would say is that we know that our body and our nervous system is trying to assimilate and adapt to millions of processes at any given time. And in order to do that, we need heart rate to speed up. We need blood pressure to actually increase. And then we also need heart rate to speed down. And we need blood pressure to decrease. We need everything to maintain balance, or what we would refer to as physiological homeostasis. We need that to happen. But in order for that to happen, we have to have a lot of things kind of going right and going in our way. And the single greatest lever that we have, or the influencer of heart rate variability, is our breathing. So as we inhale, the heart rate goes up. As we exhale, heart rate goes down. And as you inhale, the time between successive heartbeats, so the space between successive heartbeats, starts to shorten. It gets less and less and less. And as you exhale, that space starts to widen more and more and more. And kind of as your heart rate changes across that cycle, we refer to that as respiratory sinus arrhythmia, we can derive heart rate variability. And the more variability that we have across that breathing cycle, the more adaptive your nervous system is. When the nervous system starts to pace itself, or say the heart starts to pace itself, that's when we know that there are distinctive problems, because the heart doesn't operate like a metronome. It's dynamically adjusting to everything that it is that's coming into its environment. And so basically what we're looking for is just like, is your heart rate variability stable over time, indicating that the nervous system is stable over time, which is why kind of just to kind of burst the bubble of anybody who's doing like the HRV comparison. I actually say that a comparison that I would make is less of like how high or the absolute value of your heart rate variability is, but how stable is it across time? Does it not vary from day to day that much? If not, great. That's excellent. Like that's actually what we want to see. That's stability, that the nervous system's handling everything that's being thrown at it. If it's declining day over day, then we know that there's significant problems with your nervous system adapting. And if it's going in an upward direction, that's good, but it's not necessarily like we're chasing the goal. And I would say it's good to a certain extent. There's actually times when increases in HRV is not a good thing. It's an overcompensation due to overexertion and a significant amount of stress, etc. So I know that was a bit long-winded, Brent. I wanted to give more of the bird's eye view, but then also get a little bit more into the granularity. There's a lot more granular that we can get into, but that's HRV.
No, that was awesome. It's so cool talking to people like you, because I'll take this subset of knowledge that I know, and then it's always like supplementing with it. It's like, oh, okay, that's it. Because the one thing that I know, and you just touched on it there, but the score isn't the same for everyone, right? Like I have buddies that, they'll have, 80, 90 regularly for HRV, but a good HRV score for me, quote unquote good, is, 35, 40, right? And so, and I think what I heard you say there was that doesn't necessarily, the higher score doesn't mean like, oh, wow, you're way healthier. It's the regularity of your HRV and your numbers that kind of spell out like, hey, this is doing great, versus kind of the all over the place, or a declining HRV score, or even, like, what do you call it? Unintuitively, you'd think that a rising score might be great, but like you said, there might be some sort of overcompensating that your body is taking on there. And I'm sure we'll get into this too, like you said, that there's two really big areas that this can really help with, and that's the mental kind of the stress that we get day to day, acute stress, and then also the physiological stress that we get. Like this morning, for instance, I did the Norwegian 4x4s, right? And just like, it sucks.
Pain, pure pain.
And I know, yeah. And I know this tonight, my HRV will be lower. I'll probably get a red score tomorrow and just say, hey, like you trained really hard today, and, like give it a break, and so I'll just probably do some, jogging or some laps on the e-bike to kind of, get back into it. But, and maybe we're just getting already like a little bit too technical. So like, what is that process there of, that lower HRV? Because I worked really hard, and so my HRV should be lower tonight, but then I'll try to do all the things like, let's drink some cherry juice and really hydrate and get some protein in there, to try to like, like quell those, the inflammation and all stuff like that. So how does that all tie in, as far as like, if it's low today for me because, I trained, or maybe I drink alcohol or jet lag. I mean, there's obviously myriads of different reasons. It doesn't automatically mean anything, right? Or does it?
Yeah, it's a good question because I think that it comes back to the statement that you made earlier, which was one of the biggest problems we have in wearable data is that we're given this singular score, typically like a readiness score, or we can dive a little bit deeper into the applications and look at things like our resting heart rate and heart rate variability and our sleep efficiency. And these can be helpful, but making decisions on 1 days of reading is typically pretty challenging to just look at, let's say, someone's heart rate variability and say, all right, well, now given that your heart rate variability is 50% lower than your typical day, like does that actually then mean that we need to change up our training routine for that day? And I would argue that the answer is mostly no. Now, there are times where that actually, I would say, yeah, you can make a decision based off of 1 days of data. I mean, if we see that your resting heart rate is significantly elevated, your skin temperature is significantly elevated, also HRV is significantly depressed, that could be an indication that your immune system is firing on all cylinders and you're getting sick or you are sick. And so therefore, we might make some decisions on kind of either dialing down the intensity of the exercise, or we may just say, hey, today's a good day to take off. And a lot of times people will subjectively feel it, like when all those markers are off, it's like, yeah, I know I'm coming down with something, or I feel already sick. What I actually tell people is that there are other metrics that utilize things like heart rate variability that we can use for decision making. So one that is not particularly used a lot in wearable technology, even though I saw that Whoop recently released this. So very proud that Whoop's doing this because no other companies are doing this for whatever reason. But there's a metric called HRV CV, which is the coefficient of variation of heart rate variability, which is a long-winded way of saying how much does your heart rate variability vary from day to day. So is it consistent and stable? That's a good HRV. If anybody wants to know what a good HRV is, it's one that's normal for you. That's kind of holding together. We typically say anything that like doesn't vary more than about 10% than your daily average, pretty dang good. Like we're not going to mess around with training plans. Like you're making good adaptations. After about a 7 day, so this is a 7 day rolling window, I should say, too, that we derive HRVC from. So it's just that 7 day rolling window. When we start to see kind of this consistent downward trend going more than about 4 days, and typically equating to HRV-CVs being about 15% or higher, mostly like in about 20% or higher, then that's when we're going to say, okay, we need to dial down the intensity. And we also need to say, well, what's the context? Like, has this person been overreaching or overtraining kind of in the gym? Are they experiencing significant like psychological stress, relational, work stress, financial, whatever it may be? And the other thing is like, how was their sleep? Like if their sleep, we know that in terms of nervous system repair, the two kind of like main levers that we can pull for that are breathing and sleep. And so if someone's not sleeping really well and we see that impacting their heart rate variability score, it may not be necessarily the exercise regimen that we work on. We may try to improve things like sleep efficiency, how we may need to elongate their sleep time. We may need to shorten their sleep time. So there's so many, this is why it becomes really difficult, right, Brent? Is because there's so many decisions that you then kind of have to make. And when you're just kind of relying on like, hey, I've got this data in front of me, let me see if I can make like a semi-informed decision, it becomes quite challenging. So my hope is that in the future, most of these companies that are producing these scores are truly creating more closed loop systems as opposed to just saying, hey, here's your score, good luck, but actually giving you something to do about it, an intervention.
That's cool. I've never heard of that CV. I'll have to keep an eye out just on the next Whoop. I mean, hopefully it comes out to the strap here pretty soon. But that's really cool because it's almost concerning. I'm like, man, is my HRV within 10% every day? And I think it is, I'd have to look at the history, but it is funny that sometimes like it pops up to like 60, 70, and I'll have like a 90, on the Whoop, with their metrics, I'll have like a 98, and then those are those days that you're like, okay, let's go. But again, like you just touched on, a lot of times it's just subjective, right? Like, yeah, you can use the device to know that like, I kind of feel like I'm dragging ass today or something, it's like a little bit of a temperature, like the skin, you said, a little bit higher heart rate. Maybe your sleep score wasn't as good. Cause that's the one thing that I always struggle with, is like you said, like that foundational thing is that sleep to get a great HRV or to recover well, or even just like, the mental, even just like a conversation like this, that's like pretty technical, it's like, okay, if I had a great night's sleep, I'll be able to perform way better in a
Yeah.
conversation
Yeah.
like this than if,
Yeah.
like I was like up tossing and turning all last night, but it's an orchestra, right? There's so many different things to
Mhm.
go into this thing. And so I think a lot of times that, the HRV is, people use it like a scoreboard, but it should be more feedback as part of a larger system, right? It's like, what it
100%.
was the sleep or,
Yeah.
or even diet and like you
Mhm.
said, the breathing part of it is really important. And that's why I'm so excited to, when I get the Ohm Health device is that, be able to really train that, because
Yeah.
with our conversation with James, the founder, we were talking about, like meditation, and the meditation promised all these things as far as, like better sleep and less anxiety and all these things.
Mm.
And even though I've practiced meditation so much, I can't really ever say that I've really felt any, and maybe it's because I'm only like 2 years into that instead of 10 years or whatever. But, it's
Mm.
like that it'd just be nice to have like a lot more instant
Yeah.
feedback with things or tools that you can use to like bring your nervous system down to quell that anxiety to,
Right.
I guess raise your HRV in real time.
Mhm.
And that's something that we'll probably talk about in a little bit, but I used to be, um, turned on to the heart math stuff. And I remember like the very first heart math stuff that, you bought the device and you're trying to train yourself to breathe, but the interface was so poorly designed. And maybe it was just a
Mhm.
technological,
Yeah.
limitation from heart math. I think they're probably a great company, but I just remember just like always struggling to like trying to do their exercises. I'm like, this isn't doing anything. Like, come on.
Right. Yeah. Well, the other thing too is like you have to commend companies like HeartMath who were some of the first to the market in terms of like consumer-based heart rate variability. It's just that there's just so much involved in terms of like, well, you got to have it connected to. Back in the day, it was with the M Wave, it was like connected to the computer, or like you just had like a little bar that we look at. It's just like a color-facing bar, and hopefully you're like changing it to the blue and to the green. And then it was like, well, then now it has to be connected to the phone. It's a wearable PPG device on the ear. And again, all of these are great. You can there it is evidence based. Like it is an amazing strategy. It's just that people had a hard time sticking with it. Just like meditation. Meditation can be really hard for people to stick with because even though the science is clearly there, like meditation, mental attunement, mindfulness, it's an invaluable skill. Like you need to be able to have those things. The problem is, though, is that people getting to a routine doing that and creating a behavioral habit of that, it's just really challenging for a lot of people. And they may do really well for about a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month. And then after that, like people just fall off. I mean, it's kind of like why we see a lot of the phone-based meditation companies, their churn rate, which is basically like how their retention, like it's their churn rate is like way into like the 95, 96%. So 96% of people do not renew because they never stuck with it. So, yeah, sorry to go off on
Yeah.
that little bit of a tangent, but I think that
No, I
that's kind of
mean,
the problem we're up against.
but it's all valid, right? And I think that's what's one of the cool things that hopefully the Ohm device will kind of fix, because it is something beautiful that, like I said, you're not going to shove it in your closet. Like it's a glass, beautiful, like, I mean, it looks super cool. It's like it seems like it's very inviting to the touch. It's like, oh, hey, what's this rock in the top? And I'm going to put it in my
Yeah,
hand, and then it's very
yeah.
like intuitive. And if it's just there in your daily life, hopefully that will encourage you versus an app. And like I said, the meditation thing, like it's like, here, try it every day for 30 days, challenge or whatever. And it's like, I think I feel better, but
Hmm.
I always
Hmm.
feel like with breathing exercises, there's something a little bit more physical,
Hmm.
that at least me personally, I see a lot more benefits with doing that. Like, I try
Right.
to take like a couple breaks throughout the day just to kind of like focus on my breathing, either do box breathing or, like you were talking about, like the longer exhale slows your breath down, so I'll just
Hmm.
do,
Hmm. Hmm.
4 in, 8 out, 12 out, whatever,
Yeah.
just to kind
Yeah.
of drop back in. And then obviously a good cup of coffee always helps too.
Yeah. 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 That's right.
Get in there. So is there any like HRV myths that you know about that just like simply aren't true, or like you'd like to see it go away as far as
Yeah.
like, I don't know, like again, like it's such a like this, oh, HRV, but it, I obviously very scientifically validated. It's a great
Yeah.
tool, but I feel like there's myths and stuff about it. Like it's just like a little bit
Mhm.
not given too much credit, but do you kind of get the gist of what I'm getting at there? Like, are there myths around
Yeah.
it that just aren't
Oh,
true?
yeah. Totally. I think that the biggest one that I think I kind of already alluded to it, but I wanted to expound a little bit more. The biggest one is that the higher the better. I think everybody just thinks, oh, the higher my HRV, the better. And so I would always say that no, a good HRV is a stable HRV. So if you take anything away from this, is that in terms of like HRV metrics, is that a good HRV is a stable HRV? Now, that's not actually the case when we talk about biofeedback. So when we use like something like Ohm that we're going to talk about here in a bit, when we do biofeedback, the intention is to use HRV in real time and to inflate heart rate variability. Like our goal is to stimulate vagal tone, and to really more so like stimulate the vagus nerve so that we do produce kind of high oscillations in heart rate variability. But from a day-to-day perspective, I don't worry about that. The other component here is never compare yourself to anyone else. I have seen plenty of individuals who are immensely out of shape, whether it's they're overweight, their nutrition's poor, they're not sleeping well, they're really stressed. Their HRV can be really high. 100, 120. And this actually, you would see those numbers, you would think, oh goodness, like that's a great number. And I would say, like, yeah, it looks great. Now, however, this person, they wouldn't say that they're feeling very great. So we would ask, well, how's their HRV that high? Genetics is a big contributing thing. Like most people, actually, I'll say too, when we looked at twin studies on this, we find that most people's heart rate variability, or twins, that is, regardless of health status, stays pretty close to one another. So I would say that comparing yourself is useless because someone else may just have like really quote unquote good genes, so they have higher heart rate variability. I actually tell people that the true test of good nervous system health isn't your baseline heart rate variability. It's when I put you under a state and I tell you to control your nervous system through something like slow paced breathing. How much can you move the needle then? Can you inflate your heart rate variability significantly when you're doing slow paced breathing? If you can do that, then if you can go, let's say, from 30 to 60, 70 just by doing slow paced breathing, that's a good nervous system. That's one that's really well attuned. If your nervous system, if your HRV at baseline is 120, but when you do some slow paced breathing, it only goes to like 125, maybe 122, like barely kind of rises at all during slow paced breathing, that's a nervous system that's a little bit more stiff. It's having a harder time adapting and adjusting. I would rather have the person who has got a baseline of 30 but can get it up to 50 or 60 during slow paced breathing than someone who has 120 and can only get it up to 122, 123, 125 max. So I would say that those are the biggest myths that I see as well. And the other one too is just that you should make decisions based off of one day of reading. So I would always tell people, like Brent, for instance, if you came into my office here and I hooked you up to some sensors and I looked at your nervous system response and we just did like, let's say, a 5-minute reading of your HRV. And you said, okay, Jay, what can you tell me from that? I'll tell you not much, honestly. Like there's not a lot that I can actually derive from this one single snapshot. What's most important is watching how your nervous system responds over time. So the trends are way more important than these singular snapshots. The other thing too is people would tell you, like, if you took a snapshot of your HRV throughout the day, if it's not consistent when you're taking that reading. So let's say, for instance, is like, yesterday I took it at 8 in the morning right after I woke up. The next day I took it at 2 p.m. You're kind of comparing apples and oranges here because your nervous system after, let's say, at 8 a.m. after you wake up is going to look completely different than it's going to look at like at 2. You've had a lot of hours of potential stress that have been put on the nervous system. You're comparing the wrong things here. So like this is again where it gets pretty nuanced. Like if we're looking at measuring heart rate variability, one of the things that sleep wearables have done well is that it actually keeps that pretty consistent. Like you're sleeping, so it looks at HRV when you're asleep. If you're measuring it during waking conscious hours, it's like you need to be consistent when you're measuring it. Typically, you're going to want to do it first thing in the morning if we're just looking at baseline. So all these things you just have to consider in kind of making decisions and measuring. So it gets again a little finicky if if you're not kind of doing things in the right way or right order, which is why, I've had the privilege of working with a lot of professional athletes. And the reason that the athletes come to me is because they know that I can give them a protocol of what to do, but then also provide that layer of interpretation of what I see in their nervous system. And then the next steps that we want to take to kind of modify their approach to training their nervous system. So those are the big ones. There's probably some other ones that I'm missing there, but I would say that I don't really care about your absolute value of your HRV. I care more about the stability. I don't want you comparing to anybody else. And I think too, just like a great measure of someone's nervous system resiliency is to watch what happens when they try to control it. And then that's a pretty good indicator.
Cool. Yeah, those are some great ones, because that's probably the one I hear the most. Is the first one you address is the high number is better, right? The higher the number, the better. And then that clarification you gave is actually, it's not about that. It's actually the adaptability and flexibility of that when you do get into a resonance breathing pattern, that you can actually change your HRV in real time versus it being kind of in that same kind of lane there.
Yeah,
so that's a
totally.
great clarification there. The one thing I've never asked or even like researched, how does age affect your HRV? Is it something that, when I'm 20, it's going to be about the same when I'm 60, or does that change as I get older, or something like that? Because it is a genetic component, like you
Yeah,
mentioned,
yeah,
but how does that
yeah.
change with how we age?
Yeah, great question. So we see a pretty sharp declination, so decrease in heart rate variability as we age. Typically, kind of when we get beyond the age of about 40 to 50 is when we'll start to see more of the steeper decline. Why? Because of a lot of things, increased inflammation, things like arterial stiffness. So a lot of people get, stiffer arteries. This is why we see kind of like the increases in things like cardiovascular disease and heart attacks go up. People with like congestive heart failure, cardiovascular disease, like really poor cardiac functioning, their HRV is horrible. It'll be, and when I say horrible, like appreciably, like nominally low, like I'm talking about single digits. And that's mainly because cardiovascular functioning is so poor. So what I tell people is that like we are on a train here, even for those like myself who are really focused on longevity, and I'm sure you in the audience here, is that we're on a train that when we get into our 40s and 50s, like expect to see like a natural decrease in heart rate variability. We will see that. And what I would say is that my whole goal isn't to say, hey, let's like reverse that and try to increase heart rate variability as we age, but it's more of like, how can we blunt the drop effect? How can we work on certain areas as it relates to nervous system functioning as to not have the steep decreases in HRV like most people see as they age, but help to kind of like flatten that curve a little bit. And if we can do that, I actually think that that's going to be really helpful. And we see too in the literature that as people improve things like cardiorespiratory fitness, even as they put on muscle mass, when you get older, as you learn to better manage and regulate your nervous system through breathing or biofeedback, like we can actually decrease the sharpness of that curve of decreasing HRV as we age. It just like most things in the world of longevity, there's no special pill. Like it takes a lot of hard work. And one of the other things too that I'll mention, because I'm a huge believer, given the research on this, that sleep is just a key component. And so we know that like our sleep, um, it's not even necessarily sleep need, but how much people do sleep as they age gets pretty short, and it gets shortened. And so I think like sticking to at least getting about 7 hours of sleep a night as we age is super important. So I tell people that if you're going, like if you're in your 50s or above, getting anything less than about 7 hours of sleep is gonna have an appreciable deleterious effect on your nervous system. So I would say that's a really good thing to target, is getting good quality and quantity of sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great to know. Yeah, I feel like the last probably 4 or 5 years, I've really buckled down with sleep, as far as really consistent bedtime, really consistent wake time, and then always, oh, and again, it's time of year. Like I'm here in Arizona, so I was up about an hour before the sunrise this morning, but I was making sure to be outside when that sun did come up. And I'm like, okay, this is, like just so great to like reset your system. So when I do go to bed, it'll really, really help with that. So cool. That's been some great stuff. So let's move on to vagal vagal toning, which again, it's one of these things that's a little bit newer. It's been around forever, obviously, and you start hearing it talk about, and just real recently, I heard Tim Ferriss talk on his podcast, like how he's known about it forever, and I've heard Ben Greenfield talk about it way in the day, and then Tim kind of dismissed it, and then now he's been revisiting the science in the last year and really seen a lot of serious scientific efforts and research saying, hey, this is a real thing. Yes, it can be trained. So on training your vagus nerve, what do people usually even mean when they say that? And then again, just if you could give a high level of what vagus nerve is, because again, it's one of those things that like, I think I know what it is, right? It's kind of a nerve that kind of goes through your neck through, how do you train it? Like what is this thing that everyone loves to talk about? And it sounds important. And I'm guessing it is with all the new scientific research, but what are people talking about?
Yeah, so the vagus nerve is your 10th cranial nerve. So the cranial nerve are nerves that kind of operate and run from the central nervous system down into what we call the periphery or the rest of the body. The 10th cranial nerve is not just a singular nerve. It's actually a whole bunch of nerves. It's branches of nerves. So when someone says the vagus nerve, they're not actually just talking about one nerve. Vagus means wandering, so it's called the wandering nerve. And the interesting thing about it is that this nerve runs from a specialized area in your brain. So it's in the hindbrain, and it's called the NTS, and also the medulla. So the medulla is responsible for keeping you alive. So all of your automatic or autonomic organs, which are like your heart, which you don't have to think about. It just operates. It just does its thing. Your lungs, you don't have to think about breathing. You just breathe. All of these operate kind of via control of the vagus. Now, there's other nerves as well, like the glossopharyngeal nerve. It helps to keep things kind of stable in a state of homeostasis. But the vagus nerve is probably one of the most like the stars of the show. And it was thought kind of before that like all of these processes were automatic, which is why it's called the autonomic nervous system that the vagus nerve is responsible for. But we actually found out that we can control things. Actually, we can consciously control these quote unquote autonomic functionings by using something like breathing. And we'll tap into that here a little bit more, but I just wanted to kind of prime the listeners to kind of understand that these things are automatic. Like we don't have to think about them, but it doesn't mean that they're outside of our level of conscious control, that we can actually control the speed of our heart. We can control our breathing. I mean, that's a pretty obvious one for most people. So this vagus nerve, it innervates, which means it's connected to many organs, to most organs, but it has its most prominent interventions at the level of the heart, so the cardiovascular system, and then also at the level of the lungs. And we can stimulate this vagus nerve, and we can cause it to make more adaptations over time through training. So it's funny, I kind of think of the vagus nerve acts a little bit like a muscle, like we can strengthen that muscle. Now it's not a muscle, obviously. But if I think about like if I go into the gym, let's say I'm heading down to the street and go to the gym and say, I want bigger biceps. So I go in there and I do, 3 sets of curls and I put the dumbbells down and I'm done for the day. Will I grow bigger biceps? Probably not. But if I come back and I do this week over week, if I hit it twice a week, if I get in 8 to 10 working sets, well, now like we're starting to do some work here. I'm starting to actually break that muscle down, build it back up, recover well, and I'm actually getting towards my goal of becoming stronger or getting larger, more beautiful aesthetics in terms of muscle mass. Like all those things are happening.
I was going to say your biceps look great.
Thank you. The thing that we want to remember is that we can do the same thing with our vagus nerve. We can train that nerve to become much more responsive and much more sensitive. A great way to think about this is that someone who has a very heightened emotional response, someone who feels really stressed or has a short fuse, or it doesn't take them much to kind of like wig out, if you will. Typically, they have a nervous system that is very slow responding. It doesn't catch up when it needs to catch up. Our fight or flight response and our relaxation response, their nervous system in general, the autonomic nervous system, again, mediated by that vagus nerve. The whole intention behind that nervous system is to keep things stable, to keep things kind of at bay, make sure that we survive, we can think straight, we can get out of, harm's way when we need to, but then we can also downregulate when we need to. When that vagus nerve is kind of like being a little bit stubborn and not listening, it's typically because of this compounding stress that we have over time. Like over time, if we have our fight or flight response on chronically, which most of us do, we're not actually living lives that are helping us to downregulate that response. We're always kind of pent up on the go, kind of what's the next thing? I've got this financial stressor, this relational stressor, this work stressor, this, physical chronic pain, or I'm battling with an ailment, whatever it may be. That takes a toll. And our nervous system basically just is like, you're not using me as much as maybe you should. I'm just going to kind of dial it down a little bit. And so the next thing we know, we have this heightened stress response. But if we do learn how to better manage those areas, or we train that response, then we can tune that nervous system or tune that vagus nerve to listen more and actually become more responsive. And the vagus nerve is responsible for heart rate variability. It's responsible for managing blood pressure. It's responsible for a lot of kind of key physiological processes. But we have to, if we've gone through a significant period of time of chronic stress, we have to attune that nerve or those branches of nerves to listen to us. And if it's not listened to us now, that can cause us a slew of problems, both physiological recovery problems, but also psychological recovery problems. And this is where I would incorporate something like breathing, biofeedback, is because that is a way to both acutely turn the vagus nerve signaling up, but also over time, the more you do it, we can actually cause significant adaptations to where the vagus nerve becomes more sensitive. It becomes more strong. It listens to you kind of like that. It's that individual that I mentioned earlier who has a baseline HRV of 30, but then after like 5 minutes of HRV biofeedback or resonance breathing, they can get it up to 50, 60, 70. It's because they have a vagus nerve that is like, oh yeah, I hear you. You're telling me what to do. I'm going to move. Whereas the person who maybe isn't as attuned to that or hasn't made these adaptations, they may have a high baseline HRV, but the vagus nerve is kind of stubborn. It's like, yeah, I don't really want to move. I'm kind of good where I'm at right now. And that's where we can come in and reinforce that training.
And so if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like the ones that are more quote unquote stubborn, maybe that's someone that has chronic stress, or, I mean, would you say even PTSD or something like that? That's someone that is like constantly in that flight or flight area of their, mental, physical space. It's a lot harder for them to adapt just because it's always in that like high pegged area. And it's really hard for them to like bring it back down so they can settle it back down. So is that
right.
what I'm hearing?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Okay. And the one thing that I would tell people is that stress is inherently good. Like, we need stress. Stress is a good thing because it is there for our survival. We need our sympathetic or our stress response, that fight or flight response, to turn on. Stress response is all about mobilizing energy. That's what it is. Like, when you need to use energy, we need that stress response to come on. Like, if your sympathetic response was too dialed down and not coming on, you would never have a great workout. Like, it would be awful. Yeah, because you need your heart rate to increase. You need your blood pressure to go up. When we need all those things, it's great. But equally, we need our parasympathetic, our relaxation response to be able to turn on as well. And so this is why we need homeostasis. We need a good equilibrium of where we can dial that stress response up when we need it, and we can dial the parasympathetic relaxation response up when we need it as well. It's kind of like in Formula One. So I use a lot of Formula One analogies. This is my second one because I'm a big F1 fan and I work with F1 drivers.
That's great.
They do what's called double-footed driving. So actually, just like, if you and I we're out in our cars, we should not be driving with 2 feet. So if anybody does drive with 2 feet, please adjust that, because you can get in some big trouble. You really would only 1 foot. You're on the gas, and it's typically a person's right foot, gas with the right foot. And then if you need to go to the brake, you lift that foot up and you press the brake. And in F1, they don't do that. They actually use both feet. So they do like what you wouldn't want to do out on the highway. And that's because when they're taking a turn, like a hairpin turn, they need to keep the gas down or that guy's going to fly by them. We actually can do that same thing with our nervous system. It's not a turn on, turn off. Like, you don't turn the vagus nerve on and turn it off. You don't turn the sympathetic fight or flight response off and turn it off. You dial them up, you dial them down, and sometimes you can dial them up at the same time or dial them down at the same time. Think about an athlete who needs to compete at a high level. We want their stress response on, but we also want their vagal response on so that when, poop hits the fan, if you will, they're able to integrate kind of both systems at the same time to stay very mentally acute and alert and have heart rate high, but also not get tunnel vision, to be able to kind of stay focused in the moment. So this is why these are not just antagonistic systems, the stress response and the relaxation response. They actually are very complementary to one another. So I tell people never to frame it as this idea of like, hey, we're trying to dial one up or dial one. No, sorry, to turn one off or turn one down. We're just kind of dialing. We're messing with kind of the tuning knobs.
Yeah, that makes sense. Something that just came up there. I did, going back to the meditation thing, I did a 10-day Vipassana retreat, which is 10 days silent. You don't talk to anyone and you're just in your head the whole time, which was a great experience. And I do remember coming out of that, being able to just like, I felt like I was such a beast on my bike after that, because I could just, it felt like I had the mental acuity, like you said, like the brake and and gas pedal at the same time, where I could really be aware of like what my body was doing, but to still be laser focused on that thing. And I was able to kind of relax and put more power in the pedals. And I just remember like just setting all kind of PRs all over the place. And I was like, wow, this is incredible. Like after this thing. And I was always trying to figure out, I'm like, is this because I was just so happy to be back out, not being 10 days of isolation, or was it just really something that I was way more tuned in on a different level? And, like I just came to think that that was just me getting tuned in someplace, because I was so much more integrated with my mind and body, like where I could just like, okay, I really can feel my heart, and I was just present to everything in my body, but yet still able to like really put, the force on the pedals and, just get over climbs faster and with less pain and everything. So it sounds like that's kind of along the same lines of what you're describing there too, is like, all of a sudden you have this ability to kind of like push and pull, or, brake and gas at the same time, and use those in harmony, and synchronicity instead of just one at a time,
Right. Yep. That's exactly right.
So when we're looking at vagal tone, how do you measure it? So when you say you have great vagal tone, what are you actually measuring or looking at? What is that metric?
Great question. A lot of people don't ask that question. I think it's a super worthy question to explore here, because I think a lot of people would say, well, isn't that heart rate variability? And the answer is yes, but not in the way that you would think it is. When you look at your heart rate variability score, let's say in the morning, and you have a Whoop strap or an Oura ring or whatever it may be, you're getting one singular number. You're going to see an MS behind it. So that's milliseconds. So in the world of heart rate variability, we look at things in terms of milliseconds. And that number that you're getting is actually looking at the variability, or the amount of variability that is typically happening between the times in successive heartbeats. So let's say, for instance, if it says 100 ms, that means that from heartbeat to heartbeat, it's varying on average about 100 milliseconds from one another. The heartbeats are. That's a time domain indice. That's what we would call that in the world of heart rate variability, is we call it a time domain indice. And time domain indices are really helpful because they can help us to look at basically parasympathetic activation. Now, parasympathetic activation and vagal tone are actually very different from one another. They're very related, but also very different. In order to say someone is having vagal activation, that is one thing. To say someone is having vagal tone is another. Very easy example, and then I'll talk about the metric we use to actually assess that. The example here is that, going back to the gym, I go into the gym and I do 3 sets of curls. Great. Got good blood flow to the biceps. Like, I'm feeling good. It was a really good workout. That's great. I stimulated my muscles during that period of time. Are my muscles now officially toned? No, they're not. What does it take to get it toned? Time. We have time and continued consistency in practice. Same thing in terms of the vagus nerve. If you want to improve something like vagal tone, this takes time. And in the research studies, we see that doing something like heart rate variability biofeedback, like resonance biofeedback, it can take anywhere from about 8 to 12 weeks to really see appreciable, like significant changes in vagal tone. Now, how do we measure that? We measure that through something called power domain indices. So we look at, and I'll explain what I mean here in a second, but we look at something called power domain indices. which are very different than time domain indices, which is a way of looking at heart rate variability. So if I take like your heart rate variability data, we have what we call interbeat intervals or heart rate interbeat intervals. So this is like this raw data, kind of like a raw EEG, which is looking at brainwave functioning. And if I shine it through this prism, so basically an algorithm, I can look at the component rhythms of your heart. Just like you can look at the component rhythms of an EEG. Shine it through a prism and we can find alpha, beta waves, gamma, theta, delta, sensory motor, etc. We can do the same thing with our heart rate and heart rate variability. But the interesting thing about it on that end is that we can start to parse out true changes in vagal tone through something called changes in high frequency power. High frequency power is one of the metrics that we use that over time, when we apply what's called a natural logarithm, so we basically will make it a logged, which is basically looking at it like on a normative basis, we can watch what happens to that number over time. And as it increases, then that can actually give us a true indication that vagal tone is happening. And we see that over the course of, again, probably about 8 to 12 weeks of consistent biofeedback practice. We can also see that as people endure kind of significant stressors, that HRV, or we call LN, HRV, HF, which is a lot of like acronyms or abbreviations, we can see it start to go down when people are under significant stress. So I would say too, this is where it's really important that like I just sped out a bunch of stuff that like, hey, a clinician or a researcher in this space would know about and can be able to share about. But I don't expect people to be like, okay, so now do I have to go calculate this, calculate that? Like that's why like within most of the apps that are out there, Elite HRV, Optimal HRV, and then of course Ohm, like we're creating something that makes it a lot easier for you to understand. So basically you can just look at this and say, like, am I improving these adaptations of the nervous system and improving vagal tone over time? And we can kind of show you that plotted. But getting into the science of the metrics that we use can be quite complicated, as I just spelled out there.
So are those pretty precise measurements, or is it? I mean, or improvement, like everything. I feel like everything's like, okay, this is the best we have now, like epigenetic aging clocks, for instance. But it's like it's still not perfect, right? So there's still something that's coming up on the horizon that will be like able to measure more precisely or more feedback. Like, where are those measurements at today as far as like kind of quote unquote scientific progress?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty accurate in terms of looking at it from a non-direct, non-invasive way. I mean, you can actually measure someone's kind of activation of their vagus nerve by looking at and using different instruments that are way more invasive. So actually kind of like, it's almost kind of like a biopsy procedure where you can stick a needle and look at kind of like the electrical current signaling of the vagus nerve. But again, nobody's going to do that. Like it's not something that's
Right.
readily available or anybody wants to do, and it's uncomfortable and it's very invasive. So as far as non-invasive procedures go, which is just looking at heart rate variability metrics, and we're just kind of adjusting these metrics based on algorithms that have been developed over time. It's pretty good. It's a great representation because everything's normalized. So when we look at this data, we're able to kind of take it and look at it kind of on a normalized basis, which gives us much more of a better understanding of what is happening over time. And so because of that, I would say that like something like high frequency power at baseline is one of our best metrics that we can use right now to truly look at whether or not your nervous system is making adaptations and you're strengthening vagal tone. Now we can use HRV and multiple metrics in real time to look at vagal activation. So activation means like, is the nerve being stimulated? Like, is it kind of like singing right now when we tell it to move? That's very different than like looking at, has this made an adaptation over time? So when you're at rest and baseline, you're not slow pace breathing, like is your vagus nerve firing and more sensitive than what it was before you started?
Got it. Yeah. Okay. That makes perfect sense. So again, with vagal tone, does it get oversold, or is there a component of it that gets oversold? Like again, we're talking about like things that are pretty new on overall consciousness when it comes to like the wellness field, right? So when it comes to vagal tone or vagus training, what gets oversold when people talk about it? If
Yeah,
anything, I mean, maybe it's worth every,
no,
every damn thing everyone's talking about, but
right.
is it something where like, it's like, well, it's probably not great for, XYZ, or, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense for everybody to be caring for their nervous system, right? I mean, anybody that can train their nervous system to be more resilient, I don't see any negatives or downsides to that. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe we'll find something out later on, but right now, I don't think we have any evidence to suggest that it could potentially even have any negative side effects. Now, I think the way we go about training it, that's where we get a little bit I get a little bit lost sometimes with people, okay, because I don't know if you've noticed this, but in like the health and wellness space, like everybody is throwing up their shingle and referring to themselves as like a nervous system coach, or like there's the breath, yeah, like everyone's doing this,
The
or
new life
breathwork
coach.
practitioners. Yeah, exactly. Or it's like breathwork practitioners who are like, hey, I've got this new way of tapping into nervous system control that is novel and proprietary and better than everything else. It's like immediately like my ears turn off and I get frustrated because like I'm sitting here thinking, I have got something that is very evidence based. It's been well defined within the literature to be efficacious for many different things. So when someone kind of comes along and they're like, "Hey, I'm the new nervous system guru. You should listen to me and buy my $2,000, 4-week package," I get a little bit upset with that. I tried to kind of say, "All right, let's steer it away. Let's go do some biofeedback to get your blood pressure down." So that's what I would be weary of. Like if anybody is saying like, hey, I've got this quick fix, like all you got to do is like do 10 minutes of this breathing practice once and hey, your nervous system is cured. I always say, where's the data? I always say like, how do you know that this is appreciably changing acutely or longitudinally? So how do we know we're making state change or trait change, which is the longer term change? Because there's a lot of the technologies out there right now, right? There's like we stimulate the vagus nerve or we're some vibrational technology. And I listen, like if this is really going to work, that's great. Show me the data. Like, are there data to suggest that this isn't actually changing the nervous system, both now acutely or longitudinally? And many of the products that like are being produced or the, gurus who are coming out now who are in the nervous system space, they just don't have that data, nor can they speak very intelligently about it. And that's not me judging them. It's just me saying like these buzzwords are true like scientific buzzwords. Like the nervous system is real. This is not a woo-woo made up thing here. But
Right,
the
yeah.
approach to how we dynamically change the nervous system isn't found in evidence. It's just like hey, like I heard breathing affects the nervous system. So therefore I created this new breathing process. Like, yeah, it's your nervous system cure. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think so. So yeah, sorry, that was a bit tangential, but there's a lot of that can fire me up.
No, that's great. I mean, it's like it's always good in, any space, but especially like with the health and wellness space, and even more so probably longevity and anything that's a little bit more fringe or kind of, like trendy. You say, if you got a good spider sense, if your spidey sense is tingling, that's probably a good thing. But I loved what you said about trait change. There's the state change and then there's trait change. And that's such a great that, because you always hear about state change, changing your state of like, especially with sales or whatever, you always talk about changing the prospect state, but the trait change, that's like kind of the long term, like, okay, is this really doing good? And is that the measurable
Mm.
part? And I'm going to take that and start using that because I really like that differentiating, because there's like, well, even just like you said, you're going to the gym, you're doing your curls at one time. That's probably the state, but the
Mm-hmm.
trait
Mm-hmm.
is going
Yeah.
religiously and going and
Yeah.
really building up that
Yeah.
tone of the muscle or whatever. So
Right.
that's a
Yeah,
really
the example I give
cool.
there too, because to make it even clearer for people, is like I can go into the gym, and gym people who go to the gym are going to understand this concept, but some who don't may not understand it. But if you go in and you lift, enough weights, even in a single day, you'll get a lot of blood flow to that muscle. It's called pump. Like you'll get the pump to
Yep.
that muscle. And your muscle will appear much larger because of all that blood and water being pulled in, because there's a lot of damage. So it needs to start reparations. But give it a couple hours, shrinks back down. Then your muscle's about the same exact size it was when you first walked in the gym. Do that week after week after a week, and it's not just the pump that keeps the muscle big. Your muscle is tearing and growing back larger and larger and larger. That is trait change. The pump, that's just your state change. The trait change is the muscle itself actually becoming bigger.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. Yeah, I like that. I just never thought about those two buckets, but it makes such perfect sense. So I'm going to be using it from now going
Sure
forward.
thing.
So thanks.
Love
Thanks
it.
for that. So let's kind of step into like, and this is probably inaccurate, but like part 3 of this trifecta of HRV, vagal nerve, and now going on to resonance breathing. So let's get into this, because this is actually what the Ohm device is meant to train, right? The resonance breathing part of things. So what is resonance breathing, and just, the plain English version that a fifth
Yeah.
grader would understand?
Sure thing. So resonance frequency was actually the initial term that was created by Dr. Paul Lehrer. I'm out of Rutgers Medical. So this is a researcher in the field of heart rate variability. He and a few Russian scientists who were studying heart rate variability actually found that there are certain breathing patterns or cadences, so frequency, so how fast you breathe, that can stimulate the nervous system higher than other breathing frequencies for that person. So, for instance, they actually found that you can breathe. Most humans, so this would be adults, have a breathing rate that optimizes their nervous system functioning as high as 6.5 breaths per minute to as low as 4.5 breaths per minute. And when we put that person in that right range or at that number, will stimulate heart rate variability, will stimulate vagal firing, will do all these things at the most kind of like optimal level. So think about it this way. If I were to have a violin and I'm not a violin player, by the way, but I always use this as an example. I'm not a musician, so I should probably figure out another example, but I like this one.
There's no
Have a
F1
violin.
parable to this one.
That's right. Oh, there probably is. I just need to create one. But if you have a violin, you put it up and you place your fingers on it and you strum upwards or downwards, and it starts to make this really bad screeching sound, just like that really awful, like almost like nails on the chalkboard sound. You're not creating resonance. But if I have someone come in and they say, okay, I want you to place your fingers here. This is how you press down. And then I want you to strum the bow like this. And then it makes this beautiful reverberating resonant sound. Like that's resonance within that system. So we can do the same thing to our autonomic and cardiovascular system through our breathing. So resonance is just when we synchronize two physiological processes at the same time. And the two physiological processes that we're synchronizing, there's actually 3 that we're synchronizing here, is our breathing with our heart rate, with our blood pressure regulation, which is our baroreflex response. When we put all 3 of those in synchrony, so we're breathing at that optimal rate to synchronize all 3 of those, this is when we see not only just the acute changes in our nervous system functioning and vagal firing, but over time, when we practice at that rate, and generally anywhere from about 6 to 8 is upwards is like that 10 to 12 weeks, we start to see the significant adaptations of the nervous system. So the vagus nerve becomes more strong, it becomes more sensitive, fires kind of at will. You're able to self-regulate or control your nervous system kind of at will. That's what resonance is. So when we do resonance biofeedback, we have to find that rate, number one. And it used to be that, man, you got to go into a clinic. They got to put on all the EKGs and electrodes. You got to go through all these trials. And then we find, okay, your breathing rate is 5 breaths per minute. That's your resonance rate. So we want you to set, a timer or use an app where you're breathing at a resonance rate of 5 breaths per minute. That's kind of the old school way of doing it. Whereas like with Ohm, we just do it for you. We have you hold the stone, which is a PPG or heart rate sensor. And then through your breathing and through your metrics, our algorithm that we've developed identifies what is your resonance rate. So you don't have to go through that. And it's very specific. It's not just like hey, 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. It might be 4.37 seconds in, 6.294 seconds out. So we're very specific on how we maximize those amplifications of your heart rate and heart rate variability over time. So we're all about like, how do we do this as most efficiently and effectively as possible? And so yeah, that's resonance frequency in a nutshell.
That's super cool. So it sounds highly personalized for each individual. It's all going to be different, because you do hear about, like the old school, like take 10 breaths or 5 or 6 breaths per minute, is a starting point. But it sounds like that's a little bit oversimplified. And what this Ohm device is doing, or what's ideally, if you went into one of these clinics or whatever, it's very precise. It sounds like you said, 3.7 seconds in, 5.2 seconds out or whatever. And then that's that perfect resonance. Like you said, like the violin, example that you do, it's like that. And even now that I'm thinking about it, I was like, that's probably what ohms comes from, right? Because
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah, you got
resonance
it.
of
You
like
got
that.
it. Yeah, you got it. So yeah, and you're right. So, so just kind of to double click on the 6 breaths per minute, a lot of people do that, like 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out, 5 in, 5 out. There's nothing wrong with that. Most people respond pretty effectively to slow paced breathing at 6 breaths per minute. Nothing wrong with that. I think though, if we want to optimize the output, it may be that, hey, at 6 breaths per minute, like Brent, we may look at your heart rate variability metrics, and it's like from baseline, you improve your heart rate variability by 50%. Great. Excellent. Like during that time, like you improved it by 50%. Cool. Then it means you went from 30 to 45. But maybe it's like we find that 4.5 breaths per minute for you actually raises it by 100%. So instead of going from 30 to 45, you go from 30 to 60. That's a significant difference. So both very effective, but one way more effective. So I always tell people, I never, dig on like breathwork practitioners who are like, hey, let's breathe at 6 breaths per minute. Most people are actually going to respond pretty well to that. The research is pretty clear that slow paced breathing is great. But resonance breathing at your resonance rate may amplify that nervous system response even more significantly. And over time, we can actually improve kind of the efficiency of the nervous system way faster and way stronger if we breathe at that rate, as opposed to just using like a generic 6 breaths per minute.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds way more prescriptive than just, it's like the multivitamin is like, great, I'm going to get this multivitamin off the thing, but you don't really know if you're getting the omegas and the iron mounts and whatever. It sounds like, yeah, it probably works. It's the 80-20 rule, let's say.
That's right.
Whereas this
That's
is
right.
very prescriptive. It's like, hey, this is getting the highest of the peaks and the lowest of the lows, and you're really like
Yes.
nailing that there. If someone's really doing this right with this device, and you're getting that personalized feedback, what is something that they notice? Do they feel different than just the normal 5-6 like we just talked about? Or is there something that, obviously it sounds like it'll reflect back in your HRV readings or whatever, because you're just like perfectly doing that. But as far as just if someone didn't have any device and they're just sitting here doing that, and that's, and we'll get into a demo in a little bit with this where there's no screen. So there's no feedback other than the light and how that reacts to your breathing. But is someone going to physically or mentally notice something going on differently, or just like in breathing in general?
Yeah, so typically they are going to notice that they feel more relaxed. So when anybody slow pace breathes or they do resonance breathing, you just feel that weight. And the reason being is because your vagus nerve is being so stimulated. And so when the vagus nerve is stimulated and your blood pressure is becoming nicely efficiently regulated, we feel a lot of times resting heart rate goes down, and you just feel this sense of more calm. And so a lot of that is actually due to the release of a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which is an inhibitory neurotransmitter that will cause us to feel more calm, especially at the level of the autonomic nervous system. So yeah, I mean, of course, it's great to get that feedback from data, to get that feedback kind of in the moment, to know that you're in that state of resonance. But a lot of times, like if you just like, hey, I don't have the technology in front of me, I always say that I do biofeedback in a controlled environment. So like with my own lamp, so that when I'm in an uncontrolled environment, I'm out in traffic or wherever it may be, that I can get into that state without needing the technology. You become your own source of biofeedback. So I train here so that it translates to something out there. That's the true reason that we do this, is to make those adaptations so that we can become more self-aware of our own stress response and then self-regulate whenever we need to. So yeah, most people are going to see a pretty acute feel, kind of like that, almost like a relinquishing of the weight off the shoulders when they do this type of practice.
That's super cool. So yeah, well, let's get in. Well, I guess, yeah, and we can talk about this in the live demo, but my question now is what's the minimum effective dose, right? Like with meditation, there's not, I've heard so many people talk about like 20 minutes is the minimum effective dose, because once you kind of quiet that monkey brain or monkey mind down, you actually, the last 5 minutes is probably the best part of the meditation, because, it took you so long to get into that thing. But with the ohm device and resonance breathing, is there a minimum effective dose, or what's the shortest version of this type of breath that would actually work and move the needle?
We tell people that 3 minutes is a really good, like just short term, like acute session. It's like, hey, it's between meetings. I need a little bit of assistance. Like I just am feeling a little stressed. Do 3 minutes. That's kind of like a good standard. If you want to make adaptations in the nervous system, so we want to improve vagal tone. The research has been pretty clear that doing this about 4 times a week at 10 minutes per session. So it's 40 minutes total a week, not a ton of time investment. 10 minutes a day, 4 times a week, like not a ton of time that you have to invest in doing this. After about anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks, we can start to see true adaptations of the nervous system, improvements in vagal tone, improvements in stress resiliency, improvements in emotional regulation and recovery, and so forth. So I tell people, it's like, if you want the short state change, just do a couple minutes. Like you could even do 1 minute of this and still feel better. But I would say that 3 minutes is a good kind of like rule of thumb. But if you want those adaptations, 10 minutes, 4 times a week, you'll start to see that really take, to kind of work. And I won't say work, but really start to kind of fully manifest itself at around about 6 to 8 weeks after doing it.
Well, like you said, it's not the state change. It's the I've already forgot what we're talking about, but the static or the long term change of it.
Trait
It
change.
sounds like
Yeah.
that's yep, exactly. So that's what you're going to be applying as you do it. So so let's do a quick 60-90 second demo here and coach me. Well, coach me like I am brand new, because I am brand new to this.
Yeah.
And I don't
So
have
what
the
I'll probably-
device here.
Yeah.
But let's
No
take a
worries.
look at it, and then kind of coach me through what I should focus on.
Mhm.
Forcing
Yeah.
things, those, and what are you watching for,
Yeah.
as I might do this?
Sure. So what I'll do here, because I think this might actually be the most helpful thing, is I'm going to show it to you, which is right here. So this is it. It's one piece of molded glass. So as you can see, it's a lamp. It's a lamp that lives in your environment. It's very Apple-esque. And I don't know if you can hear it here on the microphone, but it is indeed glass. So don't drop it. But what you can see is that if you want to use it as a lamp, you can just dial the stone to the left or right to dial it up or down. Even if you go beyond, kind of like off, it'll turn into like white noise, so you can keep it like right there beside your
Oh,
nightstand. So yeah, and
that's
this is like
cool.
soundscapes you can do to actually white noise, and we're going to put a lot of different like presets for that. And then when you want to turn the lamp on, you just dial it up by turning the stone on top here, and as you can see, it'll light up. Now I'll kind of show you, and then I'll try my best to demo it. I'll have to like hold it, but I'll show you here in a second. Basically, to start a session, you just pull the stone off top. So it's just an induction charger on here that charges the battery in the stone. As you can see there, that is a PPG sensor. So that is a heart rate sensor. You might can see the green light flashing
Okay,
there.
yeah.
And all you do is you hold it in your hand. And once you hold it in your hand like this, you can even like just put your finger on top too, but I like to hold it in my hand. You can see that this lamp is now starting to oscillate, and it's actually vibrating in my hand as well. So as it goes up, we're inhaling. So you can see it go up, inhale, breathe in. And as it goes down, we're exhaling. The whole time I'm feeling the vibration in my hand too with the pulse wave, so I can close my eyes and I can do it if I want to. But what it's doing is it's looking at your nervous system and how it's responding to this pacer. And then based on what we see in regards to your metrics, your nervous system metrics, we're making adjustments to this pacer. So essentially what we're doing is we're trying to dial in that resonance frequency. We're saying, hey, if we extend the inhalation or we extend the exhalation or reduce one or the other, we can actually create more amplification in that heart rate variability. And so we're just constantly looking at your nervous system and dialing in that whole time to see, can we get it to exactly where we want it to, which is that state of resonance. Now, how do you know, what kind of feedback do you get in the moment to know whether or not this is actually working? As you get deeper and deeper into that vagal stimulation, to that parasympathetic state, this lamp will progressively change colors. So it'll go from like this white color to a deeper orange. And then finally, when you get it into that state of resonance, so we're amplifying the oscillations of your heart rate and heart rate variability at its highest, the whole lamp will start to glow blue. And the whole goal is just to keep yourself into that state, that optimized nervous system state. You're going to fall out, and that's okay. Just focus on bringing yourself back in through some good mental attunement, through following that pacer. The great thing is that you never have to know, or you never have to kind of like focus on like, am I breathing too fast or breathing too slow? You're just following the pacer. That's all you're doing. And we're making those adjustments to try to drive you into that state of resonance as quick as possible. And then again, I kind of did it in a second ago, but when you're done, all you do is throw the stone back on top, and then it turns back into like a normal lamp, and you go on throughout your day. You're good to go. And that's it. So instead of having to put on a new wearable and open up your phone and connect it and make sure that like you've got everything set up and you have to stare at your phone the whole time, you just have the device that kind of lives in your environment. That's it.
That's cool. I love it that it vibrates in your hand. I don't think I got that, looking over the literature, because that is cool that you can close your eyes and still, know
Right.
to breathe in or out and
Yeah.
just kind of get that extra layer of relaxation. And
Yeah.
then, is it timed session, or is it just kind of whenever you feel done that you put it back in
Yeah.
the thing?
So on top, I don't know if you can see, but on top, I'm going to see if I can hold it there. There's a halo timer up here. And remember how I said 3 minutes is kind of like generally where we want you to be? Can you see that little
Yeah.
halo timer right there? That will
Oh
go
yeah.
all
Okay.
the
I
way.
can see it showing up.
Yep.
Yep.
All the way around the racetrack is 3 minutes. So let's say you wanted to do 10 minutes, then obviously you got to go 3 and a little bit more. I like to do about 12 minutes. So I'll just do 4 full rotations around there. But that's it. So as long as you kind of have this place to where you can see that little halo timer and you can see it's starting to fill up, that'll give you
Yeah.
3 minutes around the clock. And then you can just put the stone on top and you're done.
That's super cool. Yeah, I really like that. I mean, it's such a beautiful design. I mean, props to
Thank you.
the designers. I'm sure it's
Yeah.
James and and a team, including you probably. But
Of course.
it's really coolly designed. I was bummed.
Yeah,
James
thanks so
said you
much.
guys went to Eudaimonia, and I was like, oh man, like I wish I would have been there this year.
We'll be back there.
um,
We'll be back there again this year. Well, by that time too, when Eudaimonia comes, which I believe is November,
yeah,
we'll be
it's
out to
November and
market. So
December.
okay, cool. Yeah, we'll be there again, and we'll be
Yeah,
out. You'll have
I'll be
yours
out there
before
this
then
year.
anyway.
Yeah. I'll be out there this year, for sure. And then I know James was saying the delivery was going to be in August,
August. That's right.
now. So
Yes.
yeah, that's going to be
Yep.
super,
So we're open
super
for
cool.
pre-order now. So ohm.health, we're open for pre-order, but we'll be shipping in August. So everything right now is still pre-market, pre-order, but everybody will have their devices kind of here in the summer.
Yeah, and for anyone listening, I believe it's still so. I mean, at least when I ordered mine, I know it's like a $50 discount now for
Yes.
as long as you get in that pre-order stuff. So
That's
I
right.
think it's what $299 now and $350 when it goes to actually market. So it's
That's
just
right.
as far as
That's right.
incentive to get that in there. But
That-
it's super, super cool. So yeah, Jay, I mean, that's a super cool demo. And I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I really want to ask you about here. But as far as like the devices, and obviously you've worked with people in your clinic, what are some experiences that people, I know we talked about kind of general and you've worked with athletes and stuff. Is this some of this technology that you're using with your athletes as well, as far as, the HRV, vagal tone, and then the resonance breathing is something that they see and they're actually, and obviously people are coming back to you, you're a very successful doc. So, like this is one of the big modalities I'm assuming that you're using with a lot of these people.
100%. Yeah. So with most of my athletes, no, sorry, no, I shouldn't say that. All of my athletes, it's one of the things that's really, most of them identify as the most helpful thing for them because, when you go in and you do a meditation session, or even if you do like a breathing session, you might leave that session and think to yourself, I think that was helpful. Like, I think I feel more relaxed, and that's good. Like, we want subjectivity of like, hey, this feels good. But what my athletes love, because you have to remember most athletes are immensely data driven. So I work with a lot of PGA players and the MLB players as well. Very data centric. They want to know, like, is this real? Like, am I actually moving the needle? When they see that with our technology, then they can say, oh man, I see that over a course of a 10-minute session, improved my heart rate variability by 100%. I was in resonance for 75% of that 10 minutes. Like, those things really matter to them because now it becomes less of just like, oh, I think that this was real and happening and having an effect, to now it's like, oh, I see. Like, my nervous system had an appreciable change during that time. So I feel great, but also I had the objective data. You have to think about it. For them, that is so sticky. Like, because they're like, hey, if I can do something and I improve my outcomes, like, I'm going to keep doing it. And so almost all of them that try this see appreciable outcomes, positive outcomes. And so they do it because they love it, because they're like, this is sticky. It feels great. I see that it's helping me in the moment. And over time, so this is like I kind of build this in. There's kind of two things I build in as non-negotiables for all my athletes. One is focusing on sleep, and the second is focusing on heart rate variability biofeedback. And both of them go together. Like people use this as a evidence-based practice for helping with sleep anyway. So I'm like, hey, pair it with your wind down routine. Do it as a part of a way to down regulate prior to sleep. And it's been demonstrated in science and the literature to help with things like chronic insomnia, with anxiety, with PTSD, and even other clinical disorders as well. Now, I mean, at Ohm, we're not here to like treat any type of mental health disorder, physical disorder, but we certainly know many individuals that are working with like licensed providers and clinicians who they actually say that this is an amazing way to augment the therapies that they're doing or whatever it may be. So yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to get like too pitchy there, but my athletes.
No, I mean, that's amazing. I mean, one of the use cases I was thinking about is like the people that experience anxiety in a doctor's office or even a dental
Yes.
office. If you, I can see a use case for this where it's like, I was just in the dentist not too long ago and it's just teeth cleaning, nothing super painful. Just having it there, and then he's like, here, just hold this pebble and try to, and just breathe with it. I can imagine that could be a huge use case. And even I've got a 5-year-old, and even with him, it's just like, and I know James said that it's not tuned to, someone so young, but I can imagine something like that being even if it's not working for, say, a 5-year-old, but still like that kind of interactive of like, here, let's try to move this,
right.
the light as I go, almost distracting and giving them mind something else.
Well,
to like,
my
think
kids
about.
use it all the time. So I have 3 boys, and my two older boys absolutely love using it. I mean, they find so much value in it, and for them, like they kind of like they're super competitive one another. They're only 2 years apart, so they're like best buds, but also like super competitive with one another, and they'll race to see who can do it faster, who can hold themselves into the blue ohm state longer. And also too, for them, like the blue is really pretty. It's like a vibrant blue. They call it getting into their sonic modes, like Sonic the Hedgehog. They're really into Sonic the Hedgehog. When they turn it blue, they're like Sonic mode.
Nice. Yeah, that's so great. Now I feel like, just like with rowdy boys, it's like you need to sell one of the silicone covers, so if it does fall off the table, that
we're gonna make a kids version, that's for sure, because like I love my boys and I trust them, but I do not trust them to have this in their room right now. So we're gonna do like a like a bicarbonate or like a plastic version that could live in their rooms.
So
and also
cool.
we could see this being beneficial in schools as well, like in classrooms. So like if you've got a kid who's like really pin up and needs some extra assistance there, just having one in the classroom where he or she could go sit over there and do a
For
session.
sure. I think there's a huge use case for that, because that's one of the things that we've tried to teach our kiddo from very young age, is like dealing with the frustration response of whatever, like dropping the ball or his Lego piece is not going together or whatever. It's like, okay, let's chill, let's take a time out, let's connect with our breath, let's connect with their body and kind of get back in that state. But it's still hard for kids to like kind of, because it's such a, I mean, kids have great imaginations, obviously, but like getting to something like a meditation or breathing practice, the objects help just a lot, I guess is what I'm saying. Right. Is like anytime I have, we do a snake breath with our boy, and we have an actual card that has a snake, and it's like, okay, trace the snake, but it's like having that physical object just makes a lot of difference with them as far as that. So yeah, I mean, that's super cool. I'm glad to hear that y'all are working on some sort of a unbreakable, more kid-friendly version.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So
sure.
Kind of landing this plane here. I mean, you've been super generous with your time. We're to over an hour here, but let's make this useful for the people listening, watching. Someone who have this device, which obviously most people in the world don't now, even if they've ordered it. What's the simplest version of resonance breathing that they could try tonight? Is it that 5-6? Is there some other kind of more beginning protocol that we can, pace, duration, when to do it?
Sure. Yeah, I think doing a just kind of like a timed breathing of doing something like 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, just getting around 6 breaths per minute is totally good. I mean, it is helpful. Like we know from the literature that you may not be, let's say, optimally stimulating the nervous system like resonance breathing, but you're getting a long way there. And so I think that, it may feel a little bit boring to do that because it's like, oh, I'm just kind of counting up and counting down. But the thing is that like you can work on that mental attunement skill of staying in the moment, staying present, staying aware, and just kind of use it more or less as a placeholder until you get your own. Ohm will make it way more sticky behaviorally. It's kind of like, think about it this way, is like, this is kind of like breath work that's been gamified because you get that instantaneous feedback that can work to some people's advantages, but also too can be a little bit stressful because people have performance anxiety. But I think that it's like a training ground. It's a training ground for the mind and for the nervous system to constantly be saying like, well, if I do have that performance anxiety, how do I relinquish that? How do I take the time just to find my breathing, become more aware, and allow my nervous system to downregulate? That's what I would tell most people. So yeah, I mean, without any technology right now, even if you just count it into, an inhale of 4, exhale of 6, I think that's a pretty good place to start.
Yeah, that's awesome. So if someone remembers one thing, someone remembers one thing from our conversation today, what would you want it to be?
That you can indeed train adaptations of your nervous system. No nervous system is too far gone. So if you have, PTSD, if you have clinical anxiety, if you have some other type of mental health disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, if you've just been under chronic financial stress, relational stress, work stress, whatever it may be, no nervous system is too far gone. And so the single greatest lever that you can pull to make your nervous system change in terms of adaptations is through consistently practicing breathing, particularly something like resonance breathing. So I think that if you're really looking to enhance your mental well-being, emotional regulation, mental performance, and even physical performance and recovery, do some resonance breathing. Like, it's not something that I think people should avoid, because you go to the gym to train your muscles, to train your cardiovascular fitness. Now you need to go to the nervous system gym. And that is what I tell people. I tell people, like, my own, I consider it my nervous system gym. And I train in this gym every single day. And what am I doing? I'm getting stronger. My vagus nerve is getting stronger. And I have the evidence to support that by looking at my data over time. So that was, you asked for one thing. That was just a really long-winded one thing.
Well, I mean, it's just good to know, because I feel, like the old saying of like, when's the best time to, start any habit? That was yesterday, but you can start today, and that's the thing. And
right.
Even with longevity, health, our bodies are so adaptable and so resilient. So even if you're, 80 years old, like, yeah, you can still start today and still get benefit from it. And if you have the benefit of starting, younger or earlier in life, then you're just better off for it. But it's just never too late to start any protocol. So Dr. J, this was awesome. Thanks for your time. So informative. I'm super excited to go back in and edit. And I feel like when I edit these episodes, I always get like the full download twice, and it's such a great thing. What's the best way for someone to find out more about you, find out more about Ohm Health? What are some places that you can send people?
Yeah, so like you mentioned earlier, get onto the pre-orders for Ohm. So ohm.health, so ohm.health is our website. And so it's going to be $350 retail, but we're selling it right now for $299. I think we have like little under 2,300 units left at that price. So we've done kind of like multiple runs of pre-orders. This is kind of like our second run. So once those sell out, they sell out, and then things will go to the retail price. So I always tell people, like, go in and get it early. Remember too that we don't ship until August. So we get a lot of emails about people hearing me on a podcast and they're like, hey, I ordered like a week ago and I haven't got any shipment updates. That's because you're part of the pre-order. So just be patient. It's going to be worth the wait.
Yeah.
So Ohm.health. Also follow us on Instagram or other like social media channels. So my handle is at Dr. J Wiles. So at DRJAY WILES. So at Dr. J Wiles, or then at Ohm Health is our other page that you can find as well. So, and then also the last thing too is that when you join kind of our pre-order list, you actually can become a part of our Circle community. So we just launched this. Circle community is basically kind of like a curated area of discussion of science-based articles, all that's kind of like curated by us here at Ohm, created by Ohm. So if you're like, hey, I'm super interested in HRV and nervous system regulation and resonance breathing, this is going to be like a repository for like all things like nerd out. Ask your questions. Like, hey, I want to spend some FaceTime with Jay and the Ohm team. That's going to be at our Circle community as well. So we'll have more information out there for all the people who pre-order here pretty soon. But we're launching
Okay,
that
cool.
Circle group that we're really excited
Yeah, I was just
about.
saying I haven't seen an email come through yet. So it sounds like
very soon you will.
You get the
very
pre-order
soon.
in,
Yes.
then the email that you'll leave on your order, you'll get a email that
Circle
says, "Hey,
invite.
Circle's open. Let's go."
Yeah.
Okay.
You got it.
Cool,
You got
Jay.
it.
Thanks so
Awesome.
much. So everyone listening,
Yeah.
if you've enjoyed this episode, you can check out tons more conversations like this at spanner.com, SPANNR.com. That's our longevity hub. And also subscribe to this podcast, the Longevity Loop podcast. And with that said, thanks everyone for listening and joining. Hope you got a lot out of this today, and we'll talk to you soon again. This is the Longevity Loop podcast.